music is fitting for that specific game. So what we have here is yet another attempt to fill the shoes of Sonic the Hedgehog, but this also was an attempt to get a 3D platformer out on the Sega Saturn. The biggest games around this time were stuff like Super Mario 64, Crash Bandicoot, and all those games. So that was definitely something the Sega Saturn was lacking. And I feel like Bug was an attempt to try and fill that void. But as you can tell by looking at the gameplay, it's not going to be competing with those games anytime soon. So the game centers around an insect movie star by the name of Bug, as he sets out to create the biggest movie he's ever done, which sees him going out to rescue his family from a villainous spider. It's a pretty silly story, and I don't think the movie aspect of the game is used to terribly good effect. And the presentation here isn't terribly strong either. I mean, the pre-rendered character sprites and the 3D backgrounds are good, but the art design on the characters is just awful. Like, Bug's character design is just so unappealing. I don't know what they were thinking with this guy. As for the gameplay itself, it's really only a 3D platformer in the sense that you can move into the background in addition to side, which doesn't really do much for the game. I mean, like, it might as well just be an isometric platformer from back in the day. Like, it's not really 3D, it's just 3D in the most fundamental of ways. It's also not terribly fun to play. It's pretty easy to avoid enemies. The platform isn't terribly challenging. It's just kind of a dull game to play in general. I think there's a reason why developers chose not to take influence from this game, despite the fact that it was looked at as somewhat groundbreaking back in the day. Because why would you want to make your game like this instead of the free roaming aspect that you have with all the other platformers that were coming out at the time? Bud just can't compete, and that was sort of the problem with this game in general. But it must have been popular because they would make a sequel to the game with Bug 2, which I will admit was an improvement on most cases. It makes better use of the movie aspect of the game. The level design is a lot better, there's more theming to it, and you have multiple playable characters, each with their own abilities, so they were at least trying to make the game better, but it's still just the same shallow pseudo 3D platformer that the first game is, so unless you really love the first game, you're probably not gonna get into this one. I wouldn't necessarily call Bug a bad game, but it's just so unnoteworthy. There are so many better games on the console you can play other than this, and it baffles me as to why they gave Sega gave the team behind this money to make it, when they could have given them that money to assist in the development of a 3D Sonic game, which, again, the console was desperately lacking. And do you seriously think that this character is going to be able to fill Sonic's shoes? I mean, it's just gross incompetence. But that pretty much does it for Bug. Be sure to join me tomorrow as we continue on with our retrospective.